Now, one of the most accurate predictors of information in college football out there are Pick Six previews. You guys probably follow them. I follow them. From time to time, we have some guests on for Pick Six previews, including our next guest, Brett Ciancia, who's one of the major contributors to Pick Six previews, and he joins us right now. Brett, how are you?
Hey, Bill, great. Thanks for having me back on.
80 days. Will it fly by for you, or will it go by like a crawl, do you think?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to our July 1st release date for our season preview. Then it starts to fly by. A lot of writing ahead of me. We're about halfway through the Power 5 conferences. Yeah, I'm really counting down to kickoff.
So you tell me, July 1st you're releasing all the information, your picks and things like that. We've been talking about it since the end of last year. Utah made a really nice jump last year, Brett. They won the Pac-12 South. They'd been close in some other years. And they got to the Pac-12 championship game, lost it on a fluky play that you might not ever see happen again in your lifetime. Washington beats them 10-3. They bring back a lot of what they had a year ago. What's your expectation heading in on Utah football this year?
Yeah, so I had really been high on Utah for a couple seasons now. 2017, I really liked what they had going on there. You saw in that year they actually outplayed Stanford and outplayed USC, but ended up losing those toss-up games. So I thought they were better than their record. And that continued into this year with a mix of some dumb penalties at times. Yes, some of them were terrible calls, but some dumb penalties, some turnovers, just overall self-sabotage. But I think all that gets fixed this year coming up. I think this is finally the breakout year. I remember back in November, I put out a tweet saying something about how next year, as in 2019, I expect Utah to be a top 10 caliber team. And Twitter got their pitchforks out and they were all over me, but here we are a few months from kickoff, and it's not that crazy of a thought. And I'm sticking by it, and I like a lot of what's coming back for Utah.
Well, I'm right there with you. Now, I've always said this. I know I've got an inherent bias because I'm the play-by-play voice of the University of Utah, but I look at things pretty objectively. If I didn't think Utah was going to win it, I wouldn't pick them. A year ago, I picked them to win the South. I was one of a small handful of Pac-12 media that did, but I had them losing to Washington because I thought that was a very good Washington team, but I thought it was the next logical step in their progression. This year, they've got the fewest questions. I don't care what anybody tells me, Brett. When you look at Utah on paper and then you line up the other 11 teams, Utah's got the fewest questions. And what I think's funny about some of these national publications is they've somehow forgotten that Utah got to the Pac-12 championship game a year ago, and they held Jake Browning and Myles Gaskin and that entire Washington offense to 3 points in the Pac-12 championship game. I think a lot of people remember the bowl game. Jason Shelley and the backup running back Armand Shine, they led that at halftime, let it get away from them in the second half. But when you look at what they've got, and the schedule gets easier this year, they don't have Stanford and they don't have Oregon this year. They had Cal and Oregon State. I think everything adds up for them. This could be the year. Now, got to stay healthy, got to keep Tyler Huntley upright, things like that. But I really do believe in everything. You got to play it out on the field. But going into the season, I think they are the team to beat in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I look at a couple things right away. If you're looking for conference championship caliber teams, right away you look at D-line. And Utah, it looks like they could have the best D-line not only in the Pac-12 but in the country. I mean, they could go 10 deep. They had a couple guys. I know Bradley and I could have gone pro last year. He's back in Salt Lake City. So D-line, check box right there. And then next I look at quarterback. 3 or 4 years returning starter here, Tyler Huntley. And people forget, like you talked about the national media, maybe only looking at the bowl game. You got to remember that when this offense finally started clicking in October, I mean, it was lights out. It was 4 straight performances over 40 points. According to our formula, our game grader, we calculate a team's performance looking at key stats like turnovers, yardage, differential, obviously score. But basically what I'm saying, in October, that was a playoff caliber team. And then the injuries hit, and they still rallied to the South Division title. But at its peak, that was a playoff caliber team. So D-line check, quarterback check, and then third, I like having a championship caliber team with a power run game, just in case the passing game breaks down or a weather game or something like that. And obviously with Zach Moss, you have a workhorse back. I guess one of the few question marks I have two with Utah. One, the offensive line. I think replacing 3 starters if that can gel in time. Number 2, I think it'll be fine, but the coordinator change. I think finally Troy Taylor had this offense humming, like I said, in October. But now switching over to a more complex system with Andy Ludwig, he's had great success here. Obviously, he was here for the 2008 undefeated year. But I watched the spring game, and at times it seemed like they were, the calls were a lot more complex. So I think that Utah has the athlete advantage. I hate to see them, a little bit more hesitant with a more complex playbook, but that's probably just spring talk, and I think that'll be fine for the season.
Here's what I will say, and some of the players I've talked to about Andy Ludwig and the new system, what I've heard repeatedly is he's tailoring his offense to the players he has. I've asked, I said, how have you guys picked up the offense? And they've said, Coach Ludwig's done a really good job of tailoring his offense to what we have here. You'll see a lot of guys come in and say, this is my offense, and you guys have to fit it, where I think he's fitting his offense to the players he has. You mentioned Moss. They're also about 5 deep at tailback. Offensive line is a question. And the other question for me, too, is, and Utah's been spoiled in this position, the kicking game. I think they'll be fine at punter. They got another Aussie coming in, but they've got to find a place kicker to replace Matt Gay, who's now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But if they can do that, I think they're going to check most of the boxes. Yeah,
absolutely. And like you had touched on how the Pac-12 schedule flips each year with your 4 crossover games. I mean, this is the year. They hit the schedule lottery this year when you have you're missing Oregon and missing Stanford. So I'm looking down the schedule right now. It looks like if you take care of business in the rematch with Washington State, I know they're going through a quarterback change. Gardner Minshew really elevated that offense up to a new level with his creativity and elusiveness in the pocket, something that the air raid usually doesn't have. But if you take care of business against Washington State, I see an 8-0 start heading into Seattle. So, and that's not even like a crazy take. I mean, those are all very winnable games. You'll be favored in all of them, I think. And part of that is that the South is going through a little bit of a transition with its traditional recruiting powers, USC and UCLA. So I think it's a very winnable division this year. There's a nice window here, and I think Utah capitalizes on it.